Yes, it is. And today's title of this podcast is Does the Supreme Court's affirmative action ban hurt black or white people? Pick a side, folks. Pick a side. Is it black? Do you take the black pill or do you take the white pill?
It's the Matrix.
It is the Matrix. That's what the
like
Supreme Court has put us in,
yes,
is a Matrix, you know.
It seems unreal.
And you know what? And we had talked about this topic a little bit, and we were wondering whether we were going to touch it or not, and we thought we should because it's such a monumental ruling, and it impacts everything that this show is about, which is collaboration, and it could affect families, it can affect educational obtainment, and so many different aspects of our lives. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about this opinion and how it impacts you, because I tell you, when it came off the presses, folks, you know, we're two lawyers. We're lawyers by trade, and I almost passed out when I saw this case because it was 236 pages.
I was just going to say the length of the opinion itself. So I think one of the reasons we talked about why we should discuss it is because that opinion is so long, and we're not, putting it out there for everybody to understand the way that we do as lawyers. So we want to make it simplistic in our podcast for business owners, for those who collaborate, for family members, for everyone that knows us, everyone that has a question about what does this really mean. Let's make it as simple as we can make it, because that 237 pages.
Too much. They could have said that in 2 or 3 sentences, but I understand the historical references that they had to go back to. Right. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to give a background real fast so you'll know exactly whether or not this ruling hurts black people more or white people more. So background. You want to give the background or should I?
Well, I was going to give it to you because I know you're the history buff of the two of us, and I know you love it.
I will give the background. So the origins of this case, the case title is Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. Well, for people who are watching and who are listening to this podcast, this case, although it came down in 2023, this has been a long, drawn-out fight that goes all the way back to 1978. And the Bakke opinion, I think it was Bakke versus the University of California, that was an affirmative action case where a gentleman fought the University of California over fair admissions. And the Supreme Court essentially held a lot, but the genesis or the premise of the Bakke case was that diversity can be used as a tool for consideration in admissions. So from 1978 until present day, the Bakke decision has pretty much been the law, and that's what colleges and higher institutions of education, that's what they have used as their framework and guide when dealing with admissions. So in the Harvard case, it was actually 2 universities. It was Harvard and also the University of North Carolina, and they had admissions programs where they factored in diversity initiatives. So they factored in race as a component that would allow to be used as a factor in determining whether or not you should be admitted. So in the Harvard case that went before the Supreme Court that just was recently ruled on, the students for fair admissions on behalf of Asian students decided to bring this lawsuit under the Equal Protection Clause. And what the Equal Protection Clause essentially says in a nutshell is that you have to treat everybody fair and equal under the law. So you cannot discriminate, you can't apply laws unequally. So the premise of the lawsuit was that these students at not only Harvard but also at the University of North Carolina, because of their diversity programs that consider race as a factor, remember under Bakke in 1978, that those programs were a violation of the United States Constitution, i.e. the 14th Amendment. Yeah. So that's the background. Did I do a good job, Professor?
Yeah, you did a wonderful job.
Okay.
That's why you graduated magna cum laude?
No, I did not graduate magna cum laude. I graduated cum laude.
Okay.
Not magna.
I didn't graduate any Lottie, so
I'm glad I graduated something before the Supreme Court ruling came down, or I would not probably be here.
This is true. It could have been a different trajectory, which we'll get into when we start talking about how this ruling affects things outside of just college admissions.
Yeah, and I think the main thing that we really want to touch on is, I think when whenever we discuss the topic of affirmative action, and since the Bakke case in 1978, it's always been a hot button topic. It's always been a controversial issue because I think that people view it as a black issue.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And they don't necessarily view it as a societal issue that impacts all facets of our lives. So this decision really has a broad rippling impact over all aspects of our lives, black and white.
Absolutely.
All right. So why don't we start off? What was the holding in the Harvard case? And let's talk about the first impact that we see it as trained barristers based off of our reading of the case and basically what we think based on statistical data and information and research, what we think the impact would be.
So basically what the court held on June 30th of this year.
Yes.
They said because Harvard's and University of North Carolina's admissions programs lack sufficiently focused and measurable objectives warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, involve racial stereotyping, and lack meaningful endpoints, those admission programs cannot be reconciled with the guarantees of the Equal Protection Clause. So basically, all of that rhetoric says, because you consider race, that violates the Equal Protection Clause.
That's pretty much. By considering race, and I think the key point of that is by treating one group differently than another group, then that's violative of the Equal Protection Clause. And I believe that the impact of that statistically is going to be diversity programming across the country will probably go away overnight. Although there are about 9 states that had pretty much already banned affirmative action, pretty much. You had Florida that had a diversity ban. I believe California also had diversity ban.
Yeah.
So you had some states out there that have already taken this approach, but for the most part, the people were pretty much operating under the Bakke opinion. And now that you have this Supreme Court ruling, essentially what is going to happen is that these programs are going to go away overnight, and diversity at institutions are going to be impacted pretty quickly and pretty rapidly, because we were already in dire straits in terms of black African American enrollment or minority black and brown enrollment anyway.
Right. I think what's going to be happening is universities are going to be scrambling. They're going to be creative in the way that they try to do these things. And I think that goes to the next part of the holding that's kind of an exception to the holding that allows for universities to consider the discussion of how an applicant's race affected that applicant's life. For instance, college applications have essays. They ask you to talk about things that impact your life. So this ruling says, hey, if this applicant talks about how race has impacted their life, if they've had a tough life because of their race, you can consider that, but you just can't consider their race by itself.
Right. So what I thought was creative, and this was one of the fascinating parts of this opinion, and my nerdy, geeky lawyer side of me, when I was reading this, I was just like, wow, this, there was a lot of hoopla about this opinion, but Justice Roberts actually gave almost a lifeline in it. And he said pretty much, hey, Harvard, University of North Carolina, your programs are violative of the Constitution. It violates the Equal Protection Clause. You can't do it the way that it is currently constructed. However, at the same time, I'll quote him, said nothing prohibits universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected the applicant's life, so long as that discussion is concretely tied to a quality of character or unique ability that the particular applicant can contribute to the university. And as Shalise pointed out, in the admissions process, it doesn't bar African Americans or Latinos or other minority groups from discussing their heritage or discussing their race in terms of the contribution that factor has made to them as a whole. Right. Perseverance, things that bring out integrity and things that really allow us to focus on the good attributes that we have that would allow us to be good citizens of the university and the college structure.
Right, leaders, things that created toughness in them,
Yes.
things that allowed them to develop adversity, that type of deal. So yeah, I think it's kind of an out. I like the way that you indicated that, the way you termed that. But it is kind of an out for them to say, hey, you can still talk about it. We're not giving you a total ban, but it's got to be tied to something else, and it can't just be because of this applicant's race.
And I suspect what you'll see is a lot of institutions of higher learning will become very, very creative in terms of how they admit folks and factors that they admit. So they're going to admit a whole bunch of hardworking folks.
And I think that
a lot of hardworking, struggling people
who have overcome adversity.
That's exactly right.
But it makes me think, if you think back about when you were applying for college and things that come into play when you're writing that essay, a lot is going to be, a lot of more emphasis on that essay, that college essay.
I wrote my essay, man. It was like I was writing a love letter to you.
Oh,
when I wrote mine,
you were writing it to me.
I was like, "Dear Valpo, I love you. I love you so much. I cannot wait to spend 4 years with you."
And you spent 7.
I did spend 7.
Look at that, because you went to law school.
4 undergrad and 3 law. Yes.
Yes,
So I did write a love ballad, and I also talked about a lot of different things that made me who I am. I don't remember talking about race in my letter though.
But I do think that it's inherent in the way that we write our essays.
Yes.
As we talk about this, because this is what I meant at the beginning, that this is just more than college admissions. I think it's inherent that when we talk about our lifestyles and our upbringings in those essays, that's just the natural narrative of our lives.
Right, and I think this diversity ban impacts universities on a whole. And it impacts us all, black and white, because what you'll have is statistically, the research shows that classrooms that are more diverse, a student body that is more diverse, faculty even that is more diverse, it leads to a better educational experience. And when you have a better educational experience, you produce college graduates that have life experience and that are able to address and deal with folks that don't necessarily look like them or think like them, and that really has a positive impact when they go into different industries, different aspects of the workforce. And now I believe that at least until another case rolls around, that's going to be lost, and that's just not going to impact. Again, this is just not a black issue. This is a white, black, brown, yellow. This affects everybody.
Right.
So a person not being able to be able to communicate or be able to be tolerant of others because they've never had an experience with a specific group of people, that's going to translate into them going into a workforce, and some employer is going to have to deal with that, white or black, and that could lead to a lot of different problems that don't necessarily appear to be apparent right now, but will eventually probably arise.
And I think that's kind of a great segue into the next area that's impacted.
Yeah, social impact is the next area that is impacted.
Yep.
Yeah, social impact. Go ahead.
So I think, as we talk about, having those diverse areas with employment, with just even admissions into college, I think that once these bans are in effect and you have less people getting into college, there's a correlation between education and crime.
That's exactly right. And, in preparation for our podcast today, we always want to give statistics because we want the listeners and the people who are watching to actually understand that we dug into the topic, and we always want to try to give the best content available and the best information available. So this affirmative action ban, I think sometimes people don't necessarily understand how things impact everyone.
Yeah.
So when you have a ban on diversity and you're keeping African Americans or minorities, people of color out of institutions, you already have a situation where those groups are not necessarily represented in higher education anyway. So now you're going to dial back on that more.
Yeah.
So currently, right now, the wealth gap, you have 34% of black adults have associate degrees or higher. Their counterparts, their white counterparts, are at 50%.
Wow.
50% of adults, they have associate degrees or higher. So you already have a disparity. Now this was before the Harvard case came down.
Yeah.
And this research comes from the Lumina. I don't know how you pronounce that.
Lumina Foundation.
It's the Lumina Foundation, but the report that they created was the Hechinger report?
I said Hetchinger.
Hedginger. Okay, you're a lot smarter than me. So we'll say
H-I-N-G-E-R.
Hedginger. The Hedginger report that was produced
Yeah.
by the Lumina Foundation gave us that wonderful statistic.
Yeah.
And then the other statistic that is very important is that white families have 8 times the median wealth of black families at $188,000 versus $24,000 for the black family. That gap existed before the Harvard case.
Right.
So we already know that wealth is directly and intrinsically coupled or linked to your educational attainment.
Yes.
So people typically that have more education tend to earn more.
Yes.
So now what you're doing is the people who are already affected mostly, who are not represented in higher education, they're going to be represented even less in higher education, which is going to lead to what? The wealth gap is going to increase. A wealth gap that was already increasing before you had a diversity band is going to get even worse.
Right.
So what does that mean when you have a wealth gap that is currently increasing?
That means an increase in crime.
Ding, 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 crime. And that's where it affects everybody. Because, no one likes crime, all right?
Exactly.
Whether you black, white, green, purple, blue, everyone wants safe neighborhoods. Everyone wants, to be able to walk down the street. I was about to say street.
You were, and I was just like, wait, hurry up and correct yourself, bruh.
I was about to say street.
Education.
I'm talking about
street.
Yeah. I almost jumped out. I was getting a little too comfortable with the folks. So I have to put on my educational hat. Streets.
We just keep it
the
real
streets.
Here. We just keep it real. We are ourselves in this podcast.
That's exactly right. Nobody wants crime infested streets, not streets, but streets. Everyone wants to be safe, and the problem is that our communities tend to not be walled off. Of course, you have certain communities that are gated, or you have certain communities that they at least try to keep crime out, but for the most part, it's very difficult to wall yourself off.
Yeah.
So, for example, where we live, we're in Northwest Indiana.
Yeah.
A very diverse place. So you have North County, you have South County, we're in Lake County, Indiana. Mm-hmm. And if you have crime in Lake County, generally, you're going to have, if you have crime in Gary, or if you have crime in Hammond, or if you have crime in Whiting, that crime tends to travel. Okay, right. It tends to spread. It's like cancer. It spreads out to other parts of the community because people just don't tend to just say, hey, I'm just going to stay here and I'm just going to rob here. They tend to migrate out. It's just like, situations where animals look for food, right? They're going to go where they feel that there's the most food. So whenever I hear people talk about issues like diversity, and they try to coin that as a black issue and don't necessarily know the societal impact and that it has on crime because you're taking away educational opportunities and attainment, that tells me right there that you don't understand that this directly impacts your community, because that person that could be in school, they're not in school now, and they're just hanging out and they're, available to knock you upside your head or steal your car or do whatever they're going to do. Those opportunities exist when you don't give people constructive things to do and education to allow them to better themselves.
And another point under that, as we're talking about people with less education being more likely to commit crimes, they're more likely to be jailed than their more educated peers. There was a statistic that I saw from California, the Alliance for Excellent Education, and they were saying the Alliance points out that the national average for educating a student, the average cost is $12,643 per year, while the annual state average cost to house an inmate is more than double that at $28,323. And I pull that statistic because we are now talking about tax dollars.
Right.
So that's how that everyone is affected.
That's a really good point.
When the crime is increased, you have more tax dollars going towards jailing and taking care of inmates.
That's right. That's a really good point.
That could have more education if these bans weren't in play, and they would not be committing these crimes.
That's a really good point. And I think the Justice Policy Institute also looked at this issue where they found that folks that were incarcerated, most of them did not necessarily have the educational attainment that maybe me or you have. Mm-hmm. And there is a direct correlation between education and crime. So when you put in bans or barriers to an already disadvantaged group, and you stop them from being able to, get education, then essentially what you're doing is indirectly impacting your own situation, because those people are going to migrate.
Yeah. They're
going to migrate, and it's not just going to impact them and their group. Crime, unfortunately, it tends to impact us all.
But, and I started focusing on these statistics about the cost. There was one more that I want to bring up. In California, again, the same group, the Alliance group, found that increasing the high school male graduation rates in California by merely 5%, California would annually save more than $2.4 billion in crime-related spending, and add nearly $200 million in earnings.
That's a lot of money.
So, if that's
green, we're talking about black and white and
exactly.
Blue, green, purple, and yellow. That's green. Now we're talking about green, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that affects everyone. So I just want to point that out because, again, as we're talking about who does this ban hurt more, it's hitting everybody from every aspect.
Yeah, it's a societal problem.
Right. So, I guess that kind of moves us into our next juncture of this about how things in the wealth gap are affected with starting businesses, purchasing homes. And
it affects everything, which is the last part of I believe of how this ban, the Supreme Court ban on diversity programming in higher institutions, affects everybody and how it will affect us in the future.
Yeah.
There's a name that I want you to Google. If you're listening to this. If you listen to this podcast, if you're watching this podcast, the name you should Google is Edward Blum. That is Blum. Edward Blum. He is the mastermind behind this Harvard case, behind this North Carolina case. And I want to say in 2013, I think there was a ruling. I'm a little hazy on the date. I think it was 2013. But I do know the case. The case was the Fisher case, where he found a white lady, yes, I believe.
Amy Fisher, was it?
Yeah, I can't. It was. We know Fisher is the name, but the case was Fisher versus, I think, the University of Texas.
Yeah. And
he found a plaintiff, and he challenged the diversity initiatives or diversity programming at the University of Texas. And he's a wealthy businessman that has a self-professed amateur litigator that has basically dedicated his life works to unraveling the whole system. Any part of our way of life where race or diversity is considered, he wants a colorblindless society, and he's putting his money where his mouth is. And he did it in the University of Texas case. He did not prevail, but he was very patient. He waited his time out, and he went big game hunting, and he Came home with some game in this Harvard, in this University of North Carolina case. And he's not stopping there. He has more litigation in the pipeline. He has litigation that he plans to challenge, basically racial diversity policies across the board in politics, in voting, you know, where you have
Yeah.
redistricting and different things like that, where you have governmental contracting. His big thing is corporate boards and how a lot of our major corporate boards have diversity requirements. I know we represent a lot of entities where there are board bylaws that have diversity provisions in them just to have fairness and equity at the table. So you have disadvantaged groups that are represented in some of these spaces. Well, he wants all of that gone. You know,
Yeah.
he's not stopping at Harvard.
No,
He's not stopping at the North Carolina case. He's coming for the government contracts. He's coming. McDonald's has a board. I don't know if they have boards, but I'm assuming that, you know, a lot of Fortune 500 companies have boards. Oh yeah, he's coming for those government contracts and set-asides where, you know, disadvantaged contractors, WBEs, women business owners.
Yeah.
You know, where they get their set aside, they coming for your contracts too.
And
so
you know, that's why I think it's important that we have, you know, titled this program, this episode, the way that we have, because it's not just affecting black people.
It's not just
know?
us chocolatey people he's going after. He's going after women too.
He's saying he wants a colorless society. This diversity initiatives are not just about color.
Yeah, it's a lot of women businesses that really profit from having diversity programming, particularly in the government sector where you have set-asides for women-owned businesses.
And he's going after the private sector too, because you know this case with Harvard and University of North Carolina. He went after a private institution, the oldest private institution, and the oldest public institution.
Absolutely.
Educational institutions, I should say.
So the bottom. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying so he's not just going after one sector versus another.
That's exactly right. So he's not stopping, and since he's not stopping, we're not stopping. We're going to continue to give you great content. We're going to continue to talk about and follow this issue and issues just like it and how it impacts collaboration. Not just on married people. We always tell you we're a little bit more diverse than that. Hence, you like the way I played that? Diverse?
I like
we're a little bit more diverse than that. And we're going to continue to bring you content that impacts you, that you want to hear. And what we're going to do is if you like this program, we're going to ask that you hit the subscribe button, that you like it, that you share it, that you comment. If you want to leave a good comment, do that. If you want to leave a bad one, you can do that too. We love them all. All right? So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. And Married People's Business, we're out.
See ya.
Take care.